We are here to talk about developing content for today's tablets. And by content, we're talking about the typical images, typical web development type content, as well as all the words that you'll be putting in to your pages that'll be consumed in today's tablets. Stephen and I are looking forward to presenting. So Stephen, are you looking forward to the agenda here? A lot of words on this slide. Holy cow. But I think we've got a lot of material here, folks, for you, and I'm looking forward to it. Stephen, how are you doing anyway?
Doing well, and this is a great topic, and I think the information that you've got outlined to present today, James, is really useful, especially moving forward with creating the tools that we're going to use on mobile devices. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, it should be fun. We're going to talk about typical tablet sizes and ensuring the right fit for graphics, and we're going to talk about the whole HTML5 versus Flash issue, some navigational metaphors and principles to consider, how to talk about how to consider the audience, and retrofitting sites for tablets and handhelds, and taking advantage of opportunities to design for the iPad and Android and even Microsoft Surface. So again, as Lisa said, we're ready to take any questions at all about us. I'm James, President and Chief Certification Architect of Certification Partners. Certification Partners owns the CIW certification. I've done a lot of work over the years with various folks, Linux Magazine, Ubuntu User. I've worked a lot in social media. Stephen is our certification specialist. He's an expert author and educator. He works with me in designing certifications and courseware and is our man in the field implementing programs worldwide. So these are our pictures that you can I'll get off the slide, that slide as soon as possible. Stephen, I think your picture's great. I'm not so crazy about mine.
I hope we didn't break some monitors.
That could happen. If your tablet has just gotten broken, folks, forgive us. We'll show you how to fix it. So this is brought to you by CIW. We are the Web and Internet Certification. We are a skills-based education standard. We're not just a couple of classes or a couple of courses or just an exam. We take a holistic approach to certification. We're vendor neutral and we're globally accepted. We teach the best skills and the most relevant skills having to do with open source, with proprietary vendor applications as judged by industry, and the technologies that you need to know to be put on a lifelong learning path in regards to the internet and the web, not a vendor's product treadmill. So let's talk about typical tablet sizes and resolutions, Stephen. Now, Stephen, I don't know if what do you think? Do you think many people are going to understand, get this particular image that's on this slide, this graphic here? They're going to get the reference.
I did. I thought it was a great image, and it does prove the point that tablets have been around for a while. But yes, the Star Trek relation is definitely a good fit.
And that person having I don't know if that's really a red shirt there, that's an engineer, but I think that person has a very limited amount of time to live. That means somebody else is going to inherit that tablet. I don't know if the old classic Trek folks, if you have a red shirt or whatever, you're pretty much going to die. Yeah, you're expendable. You're expendable for the plot. But take a look at that form factor there, folks. Look at that tablet size. It's a little bit smaller, I think, than your typical iPad. I think it's a little bit bigger than it's a lot bigger than your typical mini, iPad mini. I'm more of an Android person, so I've got, what is it here? I've got to look at it before I even realize what I have. I've got a Galaxy Note 2. That's really a phone, but it's a mini tablet. It's too big for a phone, too small for a tablet. But I think if you look at that form factor there, it's about right for that period, 1960s. Obviously, the technology has gotten more capable, and so the surrounding hardware has gotten smaller. But that screen size, I think we could all design for that sort of thing. So in some ways, things haven't changed at that. Look at this actual viewable screen, and you can see it. So for those of you who are classic Star Trek fans, there you go. Forgive me, I didn't want to do the Next Generation one. It's not anywhere near as interesting. Well, let's talk about a few things in terms of in terms of terms when we talk about tablets. I think it's important to talk about some of these, Stephen, because we focus too often, I think, right on, resolutions, pixels, on screen size and that sort of thing, and we'll certainly get to that. But I think we have to talk about some basic terms. And so, Stephen, if there are any other ones that you can think of, certainly feel free. But I think the first one is orientation. Most of the time, we're going to take a look. I know, at least mine, I look at mine in what I would consider the normal way, meaning that I don't look at it in terms of horizontal. I hold it vertically. But any smartphone or any tablet has an accelerometer in it. And what that does is that's basically, you could call it a gyroscope, as it were, but it's basically a device that tells whether you are holding that in portrait or landscape mode. Okay? And so you can rotate it. And as web designers or as app designers or as developers who have to, design to these tablets, rotations and orientations are very important concepts. So I wanted to get that out there. Resolution and pixel, okay? So resolution is the number of pixels on a screen, and we can talk about it in terms of megapixels, and usually you're going to talk about that for digital cameras. How good is your digital camera on your phone? Well, it has X amount of megapixels, 6 or 8 megapixels. And then, of course, there's pixels per inch. Pixel is an abbreviation for picture element, and PPI is used by photo editing software to talk about resolution. And then, of course, there's the issue about color versus black and white. Of course, I would assume designing in color is what you do, but there are the older things out there. There's the Kindle and that sort of thing. Stephen, any other things you'd like to cover when it comes to basic terms involving designing for tablets?
Well, I really think that you've brought up the main points in this area. We're going to talk about a few other topics coming up in a few more slides, but as far as the big one, understanding what's going to display no matter how you're holding the device, the position that it's going to be in, and that screen resolution, obviously to the end user, that's a super huge concept.
You bet. You bet. Well, let's talk for a second about tablet sizes, and we'll get back into a little bit about the whole idea and how you, as a designer, can make decisions based on the orientation of the device. So, I don't know, what do you think, Stephen? Do I have it right here for these three major sizes here? You've got the full size, about 9 to 13, mid-sized, and then mini. I've got a mini one because my eyes, I'm too stubborn to get glasses, right? And so I want a huge phone so that I can still use it. But I like the idea of a tablet, but a true tablet's just a little too big for me to keep carrying around. But do you see any changes in those dimensions? Oops.
Nope, those are our dimensions.
Okay, all right. Well, now let's talk about resolutions. Now, I found a resource on the web at binvisions.com. So, and by the way, everybody, you're going to get a copy of this slide deck. At least I think covered that. But you're going to get a copy of this, so you'll be able to go to this URL and grab this information. So if you're madly scrambling right now, writing down information, that's fine. You can go ahead and do that, but you will get a copy of this in PDF form. But BinVisions has a very nice summary, and I just created a screen capture of just the first few of them. And Stephen, what's cool about this is that it gives you an idea what the make of the device is, the model, and the typical screen size for these things. And it's not just for tablets, folks. It's also for phones as well. And so this is updated in real time. They do a pretty good job keeping it updated, so I wanted to mention that. Here are typical phone resolutions that you'll see out there in the world. I think, believe it or not, you're seeing 1024, 768, but you're seeing ones higher than this, and they're changing constantly. So I wanted to compare some of the resolutions, let me go back for a second, that you see with the phones with some of the resolutions that are found, for example, with your Acer tablet. There goes 1280 by 800. Here's your Apple iPad 3, for example. They do a nice job with their resolutions. And this is important when you're making choices in terms of images, making choices in terms of what kind of real estate you will have available for you. for the user. Of course, one size doesn't fit all, and so I wanted to give a comparison of some of these different things. So you have the smaller phones all the way to larger phones, and then, of course, to your general tablets. And some other, I think, a good overview of some of the tablets there. I found here. Take a look at this one. This one here talks about pixels per inch, and look at the difference that we've had over the years. So if you'll notice, it says that in this table you have the application where it says a monitor, a notebook, PC, a mini note, or a tablet, and then notice how the numbers have changed from quarter 2 of 2011 through quarter 3 of 2012. That's the last time that the data was available. Notice that the pixels per inch keeps increasing, and that gives us more ability to be creative, gives us more ability, but it also can cause issues in terms of saying, well, I can create much more fancy images, I can do a lot of more sophisticated work, but I think that also can cause problems for people who are more bandwidth challenged. I know in my part of the United States, bandwidth is not as easy a thing to get a hold of. So just because you can create to more pixels per inch, be careful that you understand exactly what your audience is capable of downloading. So here's the typical Android tablet size. So we're talking to Google here. This here's a nice rule of thumb, 1024 by 600 pixels. I think, Stephen, that's a little low in terms of what resolutions are these days, but I think it's better to go to the lowest common denominator rather than trying to push the element with your design. Unless you have the luxury, which nobody has, of saying everybody has the same device and everybody has a really nice fancy device. So this here is a typical tablet size. And as far as the iPad, you've got a lot of different sizes here that I wanted to give a summary of. And when it comes to, you'll want to make sure that you focus on the user, on the audience. And adaptive design is critical. And by adaptive design, we're going to show you some code here shortly where we have, hopefully not as many typos as on this slide, but where we have some code that does a nice job of saying, here is how you can adjust your code all the way from smaller devices to larger so that your page appears very nicely on all of the devices, and then it uses the real estate properly. Now, touch-based design is not as easy on smaller devices, is one thing to bring up. Notice that everybody has different size fingers, but when a platform gets smaller, those fingers get larger. And so you have to understand that when you're designing for these devices, you need to make sure that you can resize these pages properly. So, Howard, let's talk a bit before we get too much into the design portion here. Let's talk about how they're used, because Steve and I have been talking a bit about how important it is to understand your audience and how they're used. And think to yourself right now, anybody out there, exactly how do you think tablets are used? Now, Stephen and I have our opinions about how they're used, but I've gone out here and looked at some statistics. So I think it's important to take a look at these. So, Stephen, what do you think? About a third of all consumers online will own a tablet by 2013. That's just next year. Okay? And you'll notice that you have a significant number of units, at least 44 million by 2015, that will be sold according to Forrester Research. Tablets are going to replace PCs by and large. I mean, I think for anybody who's been following the industry, they've seen how the typical Microsoft or even Apple PC, the sales are rather tepid, and the sales of tablets are increasing. Now, right now, consumers use tablets as a secondary device. They have their tablet in addition to their PC. But I think you're going to see a lot of replacing going on. Well, what are people doing with these tablets once they've got them? Okay, great. By 2015, X number of million people are going to have them. What are they doing with them once they have them? Well, according to Google, anyway, and we have a few people that we've we've done some research on here. According to Google, they're using them for email and games. And what's interesting about this little graphic here that I grabbed here is that they are grabbing email, they're checking email, they're playing games, they're doing social networking, but also think about where they're doing it. So yes, they're, the larger little circles here are showing that people are checking their email on the couch, or maybe as they're ready to crash for the evening, or go to bed for the evening, or they're somewhere at home, or they're playing games. Notice where they are. They're not sitting at a desk necessarily. They're on a couch or some other way, and this changes the dynamic of how somebody is going to use that screen. Stephen, you know what I'm trying to get at here? I think it's important to understand that you are going to access the screen on a phone differently than if you're sitting in a chair. Right now I'm sitting in a typical kind of, what do you want to call it, a manager's chair or some sort of office chair. How you are going to approach designing a particular app or a web page. Do you know what I'm trying to get at here?
No, I do understand where you're coming from, James, and it's because in your different environment it's going to provide a different viewability basically on a particular device, like you were saying, different from a phone, different from a tablet or from a mini, and you're wanting to utilize that type of environment to get your message across. You also, the very big point about how or what we're doing on these things, not even just where we're doing it, but I think it's kind of surprising, you know, to the limited amount of information that we're actually just really using these devices for, and then how much potential is it to expand on that the more and more we adopt the devices.
That's right. That's right. Now, you've got a guy, his name is Chris Sturck over at MeQuote, and he's basically saying that we're going to, again, that 44 million tablet PC sales figure is happening. But one thing that also came out with Chris is what people are buying. So we already talked about how they're using it, at least according to Google. This guy seems to think that there's about 34 bucks being spent on apps for tablets. Now, it's not $34 for each app. Okay, we're talking 34 bucks a year on specific apps. But they're probably buying, they're basically buying not so much the app itself. I think they're buying content on the app. I mean, Stephen, when you buy something, an app, I've bought a few. Most of them have to do with marine-based stuff. Like when I say marine, I mean I want to check my tides so that I can go kayaking and everything at optimal times. I think the last app I spent money on was $1.99, which I thought was a little high. How about you? When you buy something, an app, what are you buying it for?
Typically, I guess I'm a cheap guy, James, but I like to go for the free apps.
Yeah, yeah. If it's not free, if I'm spending money, parting with money on it, I don't know.
It better be a really good app.
Yeah, yeah. It better launch itself. But I noticed that if somebody's spending $34 on apps, I have a feeling that $34 means that somebody's buying a book online or a movie, rather than spending it on an app. That's my suspicion there.
Based on the information that we've been presenting in these last couple of slides, they're spending money, like you said, on the movies, on the books, or on games.
Yeah, they're on games, and I'm not much of a gamer. I have to admit, I'm pretty counter constituency on that. So when you are designing, consider the actual usage patterns that people are doing. This here is a journalism.org survey, and they are basically journalism.org being journalism-based. Instead of saying email or games, they're saying people are reading news and news-related sites. And they're saying that this is a significant change in how people are reading. They're not reading in paper anymore. I think we all know this. But they're also saying that they're really seeing that it's not that people are really not reading through their typical desktop anymore. That the tablet has become the news media device and is increasingly doing that. I think this is important because people are wanting to read content more and more on there, and I think as a designer you're going to have to find more and more creative ways to position that content so that people can get at it easily, so that they feel that it's compelling content. And I think that's going to be very important. According to journalism.org, real-time information is very important. It's all about the news. They spend a lot of time during each session. So notice that 53% people consume news daily. 30% spend more time getting news using their tablet. And they read in-depth articles regularly on their tablet. The reason this is important, people, is because if you design to tablets, you're probably designing to people who have possibly, they like to read. They like to spend time on something. They're probably a little bit more incisive. They're a little bit more sophisticated. And you're going to be able to grab their attention. That doesn't mean that they're going to want to stay with boring content longer. If the content interests them, they'll stay with it longer. And you're going to, the onus is on you to make sure that you keep them interested. So additional statistics, 77% according to this survey of people use their tablets daily. They get their news daily. Check this out. They check their email frequently, again, news, social media, and they're interested in purchasing things, and they're spending about 95 minutes a day using their tablets. That's a significant chunk of change, if you ask me. I mean, Stephen, if they're not doing it at work, that means they're spending a considerable amount of their leisure time on this, or or their lunch hour, or what have you. I think you have people with disposable incomes who can, who are ready to see your design work. You know what I mean?
I do. Pretty much, just in traveling, when I'm at the airport or commuting on public transportation, you see a lot of people on mobile devices, using them for something.
Yeah, I think so. You were saying that when you are on campuses, you see a lot of kids with them.
I do.
A lot of younger folks.
Right. In academic environments, they're being used more and more, both in the classroom and then out of the classroom. A lot of students are using them now just for pure communication.
I've been working with my kids both at high school and the community college, and every time I walk on there, I can tell people are looking at me like, oh, here's creepy old guy walking on campus. But I am noticing a lot more tablets that people are using. Also, instructors are using them more and more. So, and people are buying things. They're buying stuff like music, but they're also grabbing information in some apps. These users are highly mobile, and they're replacing their old notebooks and desktops. They prefer to use tablets for news and in-depth information. They really don't want to pay for it, but they will. And once again, here's that $34 thing coming up, that statistic coming up. And people would, and here's the big statistic I thought was interesting, 35% of these users prefer browsers instead of apps. Stephen, what do you think, browsers versus apps? I mean, personally, I go more for the browser, I guess that's my history, but I can resize that browser easier than I can an app in general. But what are your thoughts, man?
Well, and that's, I was going to say, I fall in there, James, and that's kind of like what I was saying about, why would I buy a dedicated application? It better be doing something, really specialized that I can't get from my browser. And my browser on my mobile device, is, there's a lot of resources and services on the internet that I can tap into just directly with the browser.
No, I agree. Yeah, I see. It makes sense to me like that. Now, we've got thinkwithgoogle.com. They put out a survey, and they found some similar data. So gaming was #1 for these folks, right? Searching for info was that one. I thought that would be the #1. Searching. People just searching for info that they wanted. I thought that'd be the #1 thing, rather than email or gaming or any discrete activity. But what all of these are saying, you have Google saying one thing and Think with Google on another and Forrester Research saying another. I think the message that we can take from this particular part of the webinar is you better know what your discrete audience is doing. You know what I'm trying to say, Stephen? I mean, Think with Google, they're probably a little more gaming-oriented, so that's why it's there. The journalism.org folks said it's all about journalism. In other words, as a designer, if you don't know what your audience is, you're designing into oblivion or to some platonic idea of truth rather than what's really happening. Anyway,
James,
go ahead, man. Yeah. Oops.
James, I'm going to throw in one really quick comment that Nathan out in the audience brought up, browsers versus apps, is that some people can't always access the internet all the time, and that's where apps definitely have a big advantage, and that's a really good point.
That's a great point. So you have an offline ability that apps generally are a little more elegant at using. You could always use, JavaScript with some jQuery things, or some JavaScript and HTML5 to do some offline storage. There is that. But I think apps probably have more sophisticated APIs to allow offline storage more than possibly HTML5 does now. I suppose I'm starting a huge firestorm of controversy, but that's fine. I think apps might be, So, no, great point, man. Great point about apps. So more statistics here. So you have people starting to spend more time, of 43%, with their tablet than their desktop. And a lot of people tend to use their tablet more at home here, according to these folks. And they responded that their laptop and desktop usage has decreased because of tablets. So it's clearly the wave of the future. Well, what are some helpful navigational principles and metaphors to consider as you develop? Well, a couple of first things. What is it? I think there's an old Clint Eastwood movie. I think it's one of the Dirty Harry movies where he says something like, a man's got to know his limitations, I think is what he says. Well, as designers, right, we should know our limitations as well. Isn't that a Clint Eastwood line? Oh, well.
I believe it is, yeah.
I think, what are some of the limitations? First of all, true multitasking in tablets is not with us yet. I think that's a major concern. Because one thing that I like about a desktop is you have multiple apps open. It's very easy to tab between them. And while some tablets are able to emulate or do limited multitasking, you're generally not there. Text. Let's talk about resizing for a second, Stephen. What is it with certain browsers and certain sites that, sometimes you can resize text so it gets bigger, sometimes you can't? Drives me nuts. I see that both with apps and with that, but I think the ability to resize or whatever, at least for me as an end user, if you have that ability, I'm going to stick with your site more often than not. And I think the reason why a lot of apps and a lot of browser-based pages don't allow resizing is because people don't know the code that allows that page to render consistently. Now that people are pinching and pinching pages and spreading their fingers and making the pages larger, I think the designer basically wants to say, no, I'm going to lock that down and remove that because it causes problems with how the rest of my layout works. And I think that annoys the end user. At least it annoys this end user from Olympia, Washington. And I don't think I'm alone either. Right. You have limited input options. I mean, Stephen, how many dissertations are you interested in typing into that tablet on that virtual keyboard?
Yeah, not many because my fingers keep getting in the way.
Yeah, everybody knows about the fat finger syndrome, and it's not just between Stephen and James. It's between a lot of people. They have that issue. Voice, I don't think, has really found much of a voice yet with tablets in terms of voice input. What do you think, Stephen?
It's getting better. It's getting better, but it's still, like you said, it's not quite fully functional yet. There's still a lot of having to repeat or redo.
We have relatively weak processors and low battery life. The reason I bring these things up is because as a designer, you need to make sure that people can get to the content quickly. They want to get to the information, and they want it in such a way because they know that as much as they want to spend time on these tablets, their time is rather limited. They also don't really have the battery life, etc., to kind of muck around with your content. They want to get there right away. So when designing, remember that fingers are fatter than mice, keyboards, or a stylus. So change your thinking a little bit. Focus on how an end user's eye works across the page, how it scans the page, and not how the image appears according to classical design principles. And by classical, I'm really talking about, this is not a desktop page that you're designing for now. No matter how large that tablet is, it's a smaller piece of real estate that you're working with. Also, there's the idea of pop-ups. Stephen, what I wanted to do here is talk about the different types of pop-ups that we tend to see. Do you see many advertising pop-ups? I can think of CBSNews.com. They've started, I don't remember when they started doing this, maybe 6 months ago, doing advertising pop-ups on the tablet. And I don't know how they wanted to design it. All I know is it tends to obscure the entire page. And of course they want to get my attention, but it's incredibly annoying. I'm not a fan. But that's one type of pop-up. But there are other types of pop-ups, people, that you want to think about, whether it's app-based or browser-based. There are progress pop-ups, like if you're streaming some video, you're going to see a pop-up come along there. There are install-based pop-ups. If you've ever taken your phone or your tablet up to a forum-based site to get information. I was just going up there the other day to a design forum, helping somebody with a design question, and I came across yet another message saying, "Hey, install this particular application." It's kind of annoying because it takes up a lot of real estate. It takes away from my experience. But these are pop-ups that you, as a designer, are going to have to work with, because you'll have developers saying, "No, we prefer to use Tapatalk for a forum." Tapatalk is a app that you can download that works with web-based forums to make them easier for you to input data. And then, of course, there are error types of pop-ups. Stephen, can you think of any other pop-up messages that you tend to see when you're doing a tablet, when you're working with tablets?
I think for the most part, those status pop-ups are probably the biggest ones that I've come across. I do agree with you. You're seeing more and more of the advertisement pop-ups that are coming in, especially with the free apps, obviously. But the status ones are the biggest one. That are also very important as far as providing you information about what's going on or what you need to do.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense. So a couple additional principles. As a designer, don't think in absolute terms. And by absolute, I'm talking about absolute percentages, absolute pixel space and things. But also be willing to compromise whatever design principles you may have as you look at the audience, and to make sure that you are considering as many platforms as possible. Think about how the page is consumed by an end user more than, well, here's how it will work with a device, or here's how I was taught a page should render. Because, again, you can't think of some sort of perfect device. And I think as designers, that's what we tend to do. If you think in terms of what your audience is using, that'll change your behavior. Many times we default to, well, how can I do this, or how is this done? Instead, try to think about how will this page look to a user. Because one thing is important to understand, too many devices enforce a particular one resolution or even metaphor. And by metaphor, I'm talking about specific ways that we approach design. I'll be getting that to you, in a minute. Input devices. We've got touch screens, keyboards, and even pens. I noticed that a couple of tablets that have come out actually have a pen device attached to them. Seriously, a stylus. I don't know if you've seen those, Stephen. Some manufacturers seem to try to bring those back. I'm not sure they'll go anywhere. But I think these are the main ways in which you're going to be designing your pages for input. Here are the gestures that typical people are using. You can use your finger, your index finger, to drag an item, to flick things. People are tapping. They're tapping and holding. Again, it's a very tactile environment here. You can nudge content. You can pinch and spread pages, right, and then slide fingers. I think these are the major gestures that are there, and there are two types of them. First, the standard ones that the device is already configured to recognize. And then there are registered types of gestures that you can have that basically the device may suggest these things to you, or may be ready to learn certain devices, certain gestures that you do it, but as you do it. But as a designer, I think you need to focus on the standard, basic ways in which gestures work. As a designer, focus on the dragging, the pinching, the sliding of the finger. Those are the areas that I think are the most important. I don't think it's very useful as a designer to try to guess to see what custom gestures people are going to be using. So the first metaphor to think about here is interaction metaphors. Again, the pinching and the swiping, these are the preferred methods, and I think that's the main one. People also use their thumb or their finger to move from page to page. The second metaphor, once again, it's kind of that browser versus app. The application is a metaphor, so the first way of looking at this is through the browser. And I think that operative metaphor is the page you talk about in terms of real estate, but you have relatively static sizes and resolutions. Think of it this way. If you're on a desktop right now, you're probably not spending a whole lot of time resizing your browser in incremental bits, larger and smaller. You can, but how often do you do it? When it comes to your app on your phone, I think there is a lot of resizing that happens, and it's very inconsistent. And each time it's almost like you have a different website that's going on here. So that's the second thing in terms of browser versus app to think about. Another metaphor to think about is the choosy user, okay? The device is an appliance, and I noticed this a lot in the research that I did, a second screen for the educated elite. That's what I was mentioning earlier about the more sophisticated user. Audience members they're more educated, not necessarily younger, not necessarily. They have a higher amount of disposable income, and they can be discerning, but also somewhat fickle. They want to make smart choices, and they want to be rewarded about that choice. A Nielsen report that was put out recently was saying that 85% of tablets are a second screen. In other words, well, primarily I'll do things on the web, but my second screen is a tablet. But I think there's also the idea of consumption, another metaphor. The end user as consumer. Their satisfaction is critical. As a designer, focused, I think, on impulse buying or even impulse reading. Immediacy and convenience are very, very important. And when you're talking about gestures, remember, move from clicking to tapping, from window resizing to pinch and zoom, and gestures are very important. And once again, multitasking is non-existent. Metaphor number 6, I think real estate's an important one. You have less available real estate available even on a tablet. Yeah, more than your average smartphone, but still. Also, there's direct sunlight issues. Stephen, I don't know, any sort of tablet or phone, if you run into the same issues that I have if you're in direct sunlight, you've got serious problems here. Even in Washington State, if I'm having problems with direct sunlight issues reading a tablet, imagine what people are in Tennessee or Arizona or, no matter where, in Europe or wherever. I think it's important to think about these issues here as a designer. Finally, speed. The typical processor is not really capable of handling as much as a PC. And finally, in terms of content, I think it's important to think that to realize that content is very important to focus on and who writes it. Stephen, do you find that a lot of people who are responsible for whether it be tablet-based design or web design, don't they usually just kind of wing it when it comes right down to it? They know that there's content that has to be made. How is that content created for the page? Who's writing it?
That really separates, James. That's getting down to the guts of the issue. It really separates good web design from bad web design. More and more today we're seeing in small businesses, we're saying, oh, we need a website, we need some content for our website. We're going to go out, our administrative assistant is going to be responsible for doing it. And so, her skill sets or their skill sets need to be greatly increased. But you're right, we're becoming more and more of a society. Let's grab a template, stick some content in there, but we don't know, the value of that content that we're putting it on. We don't take it into consideration that much. A lot of care and concern needs to go into it. Like you said, whether you're designing for the mobile or for, the full-fledged website.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think this is the thing. The reason I mentioned this about content, besides the fact that we promised we'd talk about it on the webcast, is this. I just noticed that in our company, I think we do a very good job of making sure we get our content from the right places. But I've noticed out in any consulting, the content is always an afterthought, and the design is primary. And this is a natural result, I think, of as people are learning design, they want to make things to look good, and they want to focus on all the cool apps and tools there. And I don't know, Stephen, I think the least sexy app there is probably the word processor. Okay, I mean, who really wants to spend that much time in it? Okay, but it's a very, very important thing, and it cannot be an afterthought. You have to focus not only on how to present it as a designer, but you need to make sure that it is written by a true professional.
Well, the content is king, especially as far as, when you talk about search engine optimization, finding the information, is it useful, but then also updating that information. Once you've got the content there, how long is it good for?
Well, and this goes back to also social media, right? Increasingly, what we're doing is instead of using static web pages or newsletters, we're using things like Facebook or say LinkedIn groups. And so that content is constantly changing. So now, instead of somebody who's a great writer or can write a great paragraph, and then that paragraph stays static for several days or weeks or whatever, this is content that has to change constantly. So you're going to have somebody who's a great responder and a great writer. Let's talk about the audience and some tips there we go, and some tips for understanding the audience when it comes to tablets. There's no single resolution out there really to work with. Honeycomb-based 10-inch tablet screens usually default to 1280 by 800. So if you're looking for a firm figure to create to, there you go. That could be used as a great rule of thumb. Portrait orientation is an issue, and think about what it'll do to your design. And design adaptive layouts, and I've got some code here to show you about how you can go about and do that. And another tip I came across that was nice, as you go about designing, annotate your work. The Android Toolkit developers will very much enjoy that because they have choices to make in terms of Android anyway, using relative layout or linear layout or frame-based layout. And if you annotate your design work and talk about where the content would fit there, you're now engaging in a dialogue where people will use that resolution, let's say 1280 by 800, in a proper way. And this way, you can create different layouts for different sizes of screens depending on the audience. There are a couple of ways in which you can focus on orientation. Remember, I was talking about the accelerometer before. When that gets activated, you have some choices in how you can react to orientation change. So you have some choices available, and they include fluid-based orientation, which is where you have, if you have a tablet, so pick up a tablet right now. If you don't have a tablet there, pick up the book that's in front of you or whatever and pretend it's a tablet. So if you have it in standard mode, and standard mode is usually, let's see if I can get this right, portrait. Isn't that right, Stephen?
That is correct.
Yeah, so if you do it in portrait, and then if you turn it, and then you turn the orientation, activate the accelerometer so you've got basically horizontal going on here or landscape happening here, you can use a fluid-based design, which basically makes the interface larger. Or you can use an extended mode, which will subtract or add specific interface components that are important, that you feel as a designer are important. And hopefully you feel that's important because you've listened to your audience. You can also focus on a complementary approach where an auxiliary screen will appear that has sole focus on a key item, just does one element of an overall picture. I got some pictures coming up so you can take a look at it. Or continuous, where you have something large, makes the image or the app larger but with additional components. And you also have to focus on, what is the default orientation? There's some people, I suppose, go with the horizontal or the landscape as a default, but I think most people are portrait oriented. Well, here's an example of fluid design. This is the Skype app. Now check out on the left, you can see the typical default stance there. But as you turn it, right, notice that it kind of it moves things around a bit, but you still have effectively, well, exactly the same functionality. With extended, check this one out here. You have basically some things that have been added or subtracted, some features that have been added once that is changed. You'll also notice that the images tend to occupy a bit more space. And so you have some choices to make as a designer. With complementary, notice here that the first initial default orientation gives you a calendar, but then if you turn it if you turn it and activate that accelerometer, now you've got yourself a completely different screen and a completely different view of the data. So as a designer, you have a choice to see, to react to how end users will position that device. And here's an example of continuous, where now somebody sees a completely different screen, and it gives them a completely different set of information. So there's some examples of the different types of design that you can do. Another thing to think about as you go about in your design, if you don't have a clear direction concerning your audience from your supervisor or from your client, go to Net Market Share or StatCounter.com, and you can see how different browsers are being used at different times. That will be a great help to you. Let's talk a bit, do some code here, and talk about resolution. There was a question up on Stack Overflow a while back. That was where a person was saying, I'm having a hard time getting my code to resolve properly. And you'll notice here that they're basically using percentages here. And I think, and I'll see if I can not highlight it here, but kind of cover it. Notice the width equals 100%, width 95. And this person was finding that they couldn't get this information to work consistently as resolution was changed, or as the user changed the orientation of the device. And so the answer that was given was you can do it in terms of pixels, and you can use the minimum and maximum width for each of these different pieces of code. The idea being now you can design in one page for multiple devices. Notice instead of, and I'll go back to the previous page, instead of saying, well, here is kind of an absolute way of looking at it, now you have one solution. I'm not saying it's the solution, but one solution is where you can start to say, well, for large screens, notice in the bottom right hand, large screens, desktops, laptops, iPads, all of these different ways in which this code can be used. I think there's a very useful way to think about ways that you can make the smartphone or the laptop or the tablet work for you and your design. When it comes to native development, you've got a lot of tools available for you. The Android development tools, the native development kit, iPad has an SDK for you. The languages that seem to be hot right now, Stephen, as far as tablets are concerned, heavy-duty languages. I'm talking over and above HTML5 and JavaScript, or HTML and JavaScript. Java, C, C++, and .NET. Specifically Visual Basic. What other thoughts do you have about that?
Just those are, as you comment on, they're heavyweights. They're full-blown programming languages, compiled languages,
yeah,
and non-interpreted. So it's knowing your stuff when you're getting into that.
That's right. That's right. So you can develop right inside a device. You can. I'm not saying you have to, but I think a lot of people would prefer a larger, workspace desktop. But you can develop in there. It can also be useful if you know that you are that the majority of your people, your audience, are using iPads or an Android device. You can develop right in there, and that can solve a lot of problems in terms of resolution. But it can also throw you off. It can also lead you astray. Not everybody does have your device. We don't have that. We don't have that luxury. But still, there are some interesting native development tools that you can use. Pixay Pro for images in Android is a good one. Adobe Photoshop Express is popular. Android Web Editor and Magic Color Picker are very, very useful for tools for developing right in an Android device. There's a great JavaScript reference tool. Had somebody earlier asking about jQuery, so that'll help you. Analytics for Google Analytics and FTP. For the iPad, it's got great apps, iPhoto, FilterStorm, iPad FTP. All of these things are available for native developers. Let's talk about retrofitting, Stephen. We're talking about the idea of retrofitting sites, and let's talk about some specific tips. There are a lot of sites out there that use Flash. So clearly, you're going to have to move. The general cry is you have to move from Flash to develop tablets over to something like HTML5. It's not as supported, not as capable. But why can't we use it?
Well, because it's a graphic, for one thing. It's a proprietary graphic format. Back in the day, it was very cool to have your entire website done out of Flash.
Yeah.
But it takes up a lot of resources off of a mobile device.
Yeah, see, I think so too. I also think that there's a lot of devices, of course, the Apple devices, beyond the obvious, that just won't support it. I think I've noticed that the Flash-based e-learning that I've seen has a hard time running on them, and HTML5 is not quite up to snuff yet, but it's getting there. And I think the flexibility you get is going to be really nice. But when you're retrofitting, you're going to have to cover how to convert that Flash to HTML5 or to some other format that is going to work. Also, when you are using customized code, widgets and other elements just aren't standardized in tablets. So you're going to have to find elements of customization that were done that I'm sure were very clever or were very useful for a business use, and you're going to have to find a workaround. So look for problem areas in code and in page functionality as you convert pages to tablets. Taking a step up, though, Stephen, you were talking to me about some of your thoughts about how, well, should you develop a completely separate page? Should you take, a set of pages, and so you basically have a traditional web presence, and then you have a completely separate, dedicated mobile presence? What are the thoughts out there in the industry? I'd like to hear more.
Well, that's an interesting discussion, and even some notes that have been popping in the question area have been about this same topic. What do? I need to design a website so that my pretty picture, my information looks really good within browsers, but then I also have to have a mobile website that looks good on our mobile devices. Or why not use really good web design philosophy and principles and design our site so that it can detect the browser that we're in and can, as you have mentioned before, with a fluid design, can restructure it depending on the screen size that you've got. That is a more efficient use of our time and resources to be able to build that single site. And I think that is what we are seeing more and more of in industry, as opposed to having two sites, the mobile versus the traditional, to more of a single solution that can work in multiple platforms.
Okay, so browser detection will definitely help you with that. Yeah, it makes perfect sense for me. What do you think about Microsoft Surface, Stephen? Give me your thoughts about that real quick. We've got about 8 minutes left, but to me it's not even a tablet. It's a PC that's pretending to be a tablet. I'll just say that, but I'm sure everybody will just say, "Oh, James, you're not right." But what do you think?
No, I agree with you. It's more of that PC trying to fit into the tablet market.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how I see it, and maybe it's more flexible, but I'm not so sure. What about the idea of asking for a specific browser to be downloaded and all that? I mean, I do see this. I'm not saying that I advocate it. I'm not going into this naively. I remember years ago, browser-specific sites, but in some ways, I see that again.
We're seeing that again. We saw, like you said, with websites, this site is best viewed in Internet Explorer, blah 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 blah.
Tap and Talk, or with whatever app.
Right, right. And then we're, like you said, we're seeing that somewhat now in mobile apps or in mobile design. You're going to lose customers, right? Well, I don't want to take my time on my mobile site to have to download a specific browser just to view your information when there's so much other information resources out there that I can find.
Right. That makes sense. Stephen, I went out there and found some resources that I thought were particularly useful about how to design with tablets. For example, this one's called Designing with Tablets in Mind, 6 Tips to Remember. Mighty Meta has some good information all the time. Some user interface mistakes to avoid with smartphones and tablets. A List Apart, Eric Myers, a friend of ours, has a good site that does a good job at times with mobile device. SourceBits does a great job. So these are things that you can, again, you'll be getting a PDF of this, and so you can take a look and check out these tips at your leisure. There's also the HTML5 for Web Designers book. I referred to this a few webcasts ago. It's still very useful here. As Stephen suggested, it's HTML5, but it's very relevant for tablet-based design. Now, folks, we have a Site Development Associate course and book that is perfect for teaching app design and web-based design for tablets, because we teach HTML5, JavaScript. We teach the resolutions that are there. I would suggest to you that this is a fantastic certification and training course that will teach the very principles that we've been talking about today, Stephen and I. And you don't just have to stop at foundations. There's CIW Web Design Specialist and our JavaScript Specialist course that talks about HTML, that talks about jQuery and AJAX and how to use it properly. And CIW is a standard because we basically listen to the industry. That teaches us all about how to use technologies and teach them. We listen to people from Google and WGU and community colleges such as Pellissippi State. We listen to the state of Florida. As a result, we are a top developer search, and we've been recognized over the years by companies such as Internet.com about this. CompTIA has recognized CIW as an important option for its continuing education credits. We are a certification that puts people on a lifelong learning path, not a vendor's product treadmill. And as you go throughout your career in IT, as a designer, as an executive, CIW follows you along the way. And we have done studies of the proven salary impact of the CIW difference in terms of JavaScript, for example, database, and other technologies, including web design, which applies right to tablets, that CIW provides a great amount of salary impact. And we have a lot of people over the years who have gone on the line, basically saying that CIW is a very important impact for their career. So today, folks, we've talked about typical tablet sizes and resolutions, how to work with graphics and video and content, how to position that properly in terms of orientation. We've talked a bit about HTML5 and Flash, how to consider your audience, and retrofitting sites. So there's a summary. Does anybody, are there any questions outlining right now? And Stephen, what other additions would you like to kick in at this particular time? Yeah.
James, I think you presented a tremendous amount of information today that really boils down to, yeah, there are some technical issues to consider when designing for the mobile platform, but the underlying theme doesn't stretch too far from traditional web design. You've got to understand your audience. You've got to understand that your audience will not be viewing your products on a standard device, and so you've got to take things into consideration when you're doing your design. And all of that is really good in whatever type of design you're trying to do, whether it's traditional or mobile.
Yep, I agree. Lisa, have you found any questions that people are having in terms of the information that we had that we provided in terms of tablets?
I think most of it's been pretty much addressed. Most of our questions in the questions panel have been addressed.
Cool.
Adele asked that you mention the HTML5 book title again. And Adele, we will be sending out a copy of the presentation, so if James has that listed in his slides, you'll be getting that too.
Sure. Folks, you'll be getting the slides here shortly, but let me see if I can scroll back there real quick so you can take a look at it. There you go. It's called HTML5 for Web Designers. Don't give too short shrift to the CIW book either. Our CIW course, Site Development Associate, or what I always call SDA, that's also a very effective book as well, if you want to look at it in terms of a book. But you're going to get a tremendous amount of information. So I think that combined with the HTML5 book would be a very good way to go. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, of course. We have information always updated there about the program. Our next topic is going to be we're taking a little bit more of a hard turn into programming. We're going to talk not necessarily about what specific language to use, but the grammar of programming. What are some of the key elements that you need to learn about as you take a step out of the pure design world and into programming? In other words, not just, well, learn this language and that language and whatever, but what are some of the key constructs, some of the key things that you need to understand as a programmer so that you can go in and really take advantage of any of the languages that are out there, from PHP to JavaScript to Ruby and others. We're going to be here again on February 20th more or less the same time, 8 a.m. Pacific. You can register at CIWcertified.com. So we're looking forward to seeing you there. And so, Stephen, I thank you very much for joining me on the webcast. It's always a true pleasure to be here presenting with you. And Lisa, as always, it's wonderful to be working with you.